Hey guys, Mike here, and today I'm bringing you another segment on Dragon Ball Z. The topic of this video is something that I don't think I've seen anyone else talk about in the past. That is, what if King Cold or Cooler went to Namek instead of Frieza? We all know that Frieza went to Namek after learning about the Dragon Balls there after spying over Vegeta's scouter. After hearing about Vegeta's plan to use the Dragon Balls there to wish for immortality, Frieza decided to steal this plan for himself and put it into action. But what if someone else had been spying on Vegeta's scouter, say King Cold or Cooler, and instead of Frieza, they decide to go to Namek for the same purposes? How would this impact the story and the events therein if these characters were to replace Frieza in the events? Well, I have a few ideas, so without further ado, let's get started. Now I'll start with King Cold, as he was the one who was introduced first in the story. From the little we saw of King Cold, he definitely seems to have a completely different temperament than Frieza. He seems far more calculated and collective than Frieza, for example, saying that he actually preferred to destroy the Earth rather than waiting for Goku and torturing him by killing its population. Also, as opposed to Frieza when he first fought Goku, King Cold seemed far more open to the idea of teaming up with Frieza than simply letting one of them fight him alone. On top of this, it seems that King Cold, without even transforming, seems far more powerful than Frieza unless he's at his maximum level. This is something that would definitely give King Cold the edge in a fight, even against Frieza, because of the fact that, while it takes time for Frieza to power up to his maximum level, King Cold doesn't have to worry about that situation, as he's vastly above Frieza in his 4th, 3rd, 2nd, or 1st form, unless Frieza powers up. Furthermore, we don't actually know if King Cold has the ability to transform, but it would appear that he might, considering in an interview with Akira Toriyama, he said that King Cold was a powerful mutant, and that Frieza was born from him alone and inherited his power. So what this could mean is similar to a Cell Jr., Frieza is actually an asexual reproduction of King Cold, which would make him sort of a duplicate. The way I always looked at this is that King Cold is just a much older version of Frieza. Now, most people always assume that King Cold was actually in his 2nd transformed state because he's much taller and looks much more similar to Frieza in that form that he displayed on Namek. However, due to something that Goku said when he first met Frieza in his final form, that Frieza looked very young, I always assumed that perhaps King Cold was actually in the initial form we see Frieza in, or his most constrained form, and he was simply much older, which is why he appeared so much larger. Considering the fact that King Cold is far more powerful than a suppressed Frieza in his other forms to begin with, and the fact that he's far more calculating and strategic, I would definitely say that overall, King Cold would pose a much greater threat than Frieza did on Namek. King Cold likely wouldn't be the one to sit back and allow everyone to try and do everything for him while consistently overestimating his opponents. Instead, he'd probably step in much sooner and deal with everyone himself. Even if we assume that King Cold cannot actually transform, he would still be so vastly above every other transformed state of Frieza that any of the other Z fighters would pose zero threat to him whatsoever, including Vegeta. King Cold doesn't really seem the type to hold back either, and actively seeks out every opportunity he can to advance in a fight. So even if King Cold was holding back for a time, and Goku decided to use his Kaioken times 20, it's likely that King Cold would immediately use his full power and dispose of Goku as quickly as possible. But considering King Cold's demeanor, it's very likely that once Guru died and Dragon Balls became useless, he'd probably just blow up the planet for inconveniencing him rather than getting involved in a fight. So it's very unlikely that in the event that King Cold went to Namek, there would be any chance for Goku to turn into a Super Saiyan or come out triumphant over him. Though assuming Goku does show up to fight King Cold and he's killed all of his friends and Goku does turn into a Super Saiyan, assuming that King Cold is incapable of transformation, there is a very large possibility that the fight still goes the same way that it did against Frieza. In this case, King Cold would be at a greater disadvantage because Frieza in his max power form is stronger than he is. And although it's said that Frieza powered up with his robotic enhancements after the fight on Namek, and it's likely that Goku also got more powerful training in the year afterwards, considering that we don't know by how much, it's still likely that King Cold would be at a disadvantage, even if it's by a smaller margin if we assume that he was stronger than Frieza was on Namek. But overall, I would definitely have to say that this is a much worse scenario for Goku and his friends to be involved in. Now, moving on to Cooler, he's definitely someone whose temperament is far more in line with Frieza than King Cold is, which makes sense considering that he is based on Frieza. He'll often allow his henchmen to do most of the dirty work for him, as we saw in the movie Cooler's Revenge. However, unlike Frieza, Cooler is definitely far more hands-on, far more willing to step out on the front lines and deal with people whom he feels are getting in his way. On top of this, even if Cooler does feel the need to use his henchmen instead of himself, his henchmen are far more powerful than Frieza's were, whereas Captain Ginyu was Frieza's most powerful henchman that we knew of at the time. The power levels of Cooler's henchmen seem to be far stronger, so in this case it would be a no-win scenario for Vegeta, Gohan, and Krillin before Goku showed up, and as a result they would all likely be wiped out. And Goku himself would definitely have to use a much higher level of Kaioken to fight them than he did against Ginyu. But let's assume, up until the fight with Cooler, that everything worked the same way that it did against Frieza. A similar situation to how it played out with King Cold would definitely happen in this case as well. Gohan, Krillin, Vegeta, and Piccolo would likely all be wiped out, considering the fact that Cooler is always in his truest form, which gives him a much higher power level than Frieza started out with in their fights. Cooler doesn't like to play around with fighters as much as Frieza did either, so he wouldn't hold back anywhere near as much as Frieza did in their fights, and would likely wipe them all out in an instant. What would happen next is a little bit up in the air because of the fact that we don't really know how powerful Cooler was. The reason I say this is that this movie could not have taken place at a period of time which matches up with the rest of the timeline in the actual manga. There are too many discrepancies and inconsistencies which bar it from being a part of the timeline. Considering what is presented in the movie, the only period of time which this could have taken place in is during the year in which Goku is on Yardrat. This would mean that instead of going to Yardrat, Goku would have returned back to Earth. And although it is said in the movie that Goku has gotten stronger, considering that he was home with his family, it's likely that he wasn't able to train as hard as he could when he was on his own. Furthermore, the powers that we see for Cooler are so inconsistent it doesn't match up with the rest of the movie. And if this was actually his transformed power, he would have effortlessly killed Goku even in his Super Saiyan form. So considering all of this, the only thing that we're left to do is use the movie to dictate how powerful Cooler actually is. Now when we look at their fight in the movie Cooler's Revenge, it would appear that Cooler and Goku are far more evenly matched than Goku would have been against Frieza. Not only this, but Goku in his Kaioken form is actually seeming to get the better of Cooler before he transforms. Now it's never explicitly said what form of Kaioken Goku is using, either times 10 or times 20, but for the sake of this argument we're going to use the times 20. In either case, going by this, Cooler would appear to be far weaker than Frieza in his truest form, probably being only around 50% of Frieza's max power. This is further demonstrated by the fact that once Cooler goes into his ultimate form, he is still dominated by Goku in his Super Saiyan form. And this appears to be a Super Saiyan form that Goku still doesn't have full control over, considering how he transforms in the first place. It would appear that the only thing Cooler has over Frieza is his ability to gather energy at a faster rate. Furthermore, in his ultimate form, it would seem that Cooler is barely stronger than Frieza at all. But overall, I would still say that Cooler is the greater threat than Frieza if he were to appear on Namek, simply because I doubt that he would allow Goku to ever get to the point where he would be able to turn into a Super Saiyan. It's likely that even if Goku were to match Cooler in his 20 times Kaioken, Cooler would immediately whip out his final transformation and make quick work of Goku. So considering the overall strength of his henchmen, Cooler's temperament, and his overall power, I would definitely have to say that he'd be a much greater threat than Frieza if he were put in Frieza's place on Namek. So there you have it. I believe I've demonstrated that both King Cold and Cooler, if placed in Frieza's place on Namek, would pose a much greater threat and would probably end the series right there. Overall, it's mostly due to Frieza's arrogance and laziness that he ended up being defeated at all. And if he had simply used his full form from the beginning, been more hands-on like his father or brother, and went full power against Goku rather than toying with him, the series likely would have ended right there as well. But I guess hindsight is 20/20. Well, my name is Mike, and this has been another segment on Dragon Ball Z. Let me know your own thoughts in the comments section, what topics you'd like me to talk about next, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. And you better subscribe!